At the time of writing and filming this video, we're still knee-deep in the great Nintendo Direct drought of 2020. So it's safe to say we still have quite a bit to learn about this year. Maybe a new Nintendo Direct has already been announced and this video is outdated. Who knows? I can't see the future, but I can see the past, and the past tells me that we are destined to get at least one new Zelda game this year. We have gotten at least one new Zelda game per year since Breath of the Wild came out, and I don't think 2020 will be the exception. What will the 2020 Zelda game be? Will there maybe even be more than one? Let's talk about it. Breath of the Wild 2 was the big surprise announcement during Nintendo's E3 2019 Direct. So if you think about it, it's technically the most likely game on this list to come out this year because, well, we already know it's in the works and will definitely come out at some point. The thing that affects this the most though is the fact that we have no idea what the scope of this project itself is, since we haven't seen more than that initial E3 2019 tease. If this game is a Majora's Mask sort of thing in more ways than not, it's very possible that instead of the customary 5+ years Zelda games usually take to develop, Breath of the Wild 2 could easily take 3, 2, or even 1 year to complete, depending on how much of the original Breath of the Wild's assets they choose to use as a foundation for the sequel. As far as my hopes for this game go, I hope they give people what they seem to want in regards to it having a stronger narrative, but even more than that, I hope they double down on the exploratory nature of the first game to appease those old fans. That said, I wouldn't mind temples returning as long as they don't come back at the expense of the wide open nature of the original Breath of the Wild. I also hope they expand on the combat, both by adding enemy variety and by adding to the ways that you can approach battle on a mechanical level. I love how Home Alone-like fighting NPCs can be, and I hope they add more depth to that. It couldn't hurt to add to Link's direct fighting ability as well. Apart from that, I'd love to see this game take place in a semi-revitalized Hyrule. It would be a great way to justify making this game feel more lively relative to the desolate feeling that the original game had. It'd be interesting to see what exactly is the major threat of this game too, and lastly, I want to see what effect a complete focus on Switch would have for this game on a technical level. I'd assume the technical issues of the last game in terms of the frame drops will largely be addressed here thanks to not needing to target Wii U spec, but I'd also had to guess that we'd see some type of technological advancement beyond that with the additional horsepower. If Zelda isn't playable, I will be highly upset for at least 20 minutes when that announcement is made before I ultimately move on with my life, because not only do I think interesting gameplay can happen from her inclusion, given her different archetype from Link, if they decide to go the extra mile and implement co-op gameplay on some level like Al Numa teased back when Breath of the Wild was still just known as Zelda for Wii U, that can make this game truly stand out even amongst the giant shadow that its predecessor cast. I could honestly go on and on about this game, and I hope we see it this year. That said, while I do think it's the most likely game, simply due to it being the only confirmed game here, there are other games that could very well come out in its place. So, moving on. The next few projects I think could fill the 2020 Zelda quota all fit in a similar category: HD Remake. That don't mean that there aren't many gameplay concepts to be had here. They will be largely unchanged with a few exceptions. That said, time for some rapid fire Zelda HD remakes and/or ports that make sense to come to Switch at some time. Given the fact that Nintendo has already made it their mission in life to leave Wii U with as little to its name as possible, they might as well twist the knife a little bit more and take its current strength of being the best console for Zelda fans. That would start with the Switch release for Wind Waker HD, and that's because, selfishly, before the release of Breath of the Wild, Wind Waker was tied with Link to the Past for the title of my favorite Zelda games of all time. So bringing Wind Waker to Switch would be the most hype possible announcements for me other than Breath of the Wild 2 releasing. That said, I'd imagine it couldn't be a direct port since the game did use the gamepad on some level in its HD remaster on that console, and I'd imagine they'd want to make small tweaks to things like Rumble to fit the Switch a bit more like they did to a degree with the Switch version of Breath of the Wild. And while we're on the topic of ports from the Wii U era, thanks to being released near the tail end of that console cycle, Twilight Princess HD didn't really get a fair shake. but now that Switch is thriving and people are hungry for Zelda, putting this game on Switch could help it find new life. I personally have a few gripes with both the original game and the Wii U release itself, so I'd like to see if they rework the visuals on some level. In my opinion, it doesn't hold up as well as Wind Waker did in its base form, so simply up-resing the visuals and doing new lighting effects and whatnot doesn't have the same effect on Twilight Princess that it does for that game. I just feel like this game's aesthetic is the product of the brown and gray hue every quote-unquote core gamer game seemed to require, up until like BioShock Infinite showed developers that hardcore games could have color and still be accepted by the cool kids. But maybe that's just me. Maybe you guys feel differently. I'd be interested to see how you feel about the Twilight Princess visuals in the comments. Also, I'm not the biggest fan of the whole werewolf length thing, but that aside, every Zelda game is somebody's favorite. So the more the merrier. That said, another Zelda swan song that didn't get the same treatment as these two games that I think should get an HD remake in a similar vein is Skyward Sword. And this game is on the complete other end of the spectrum, I feel, so it could be the most interesting of the three. What I mean by that specifically is I think Wind Waker is incredible the way it is and can be released completely unchanged other than a few Switch specific tweaks. I think Twilight Princess needs some work, but not exactly major game-changing things, despite how I feel about those werewolf segments. Skyward Sword, though, would likely need a pretty sizable restructuring as far as the gameplay goes. The Joy-Con could allow for a similar playstyle as far as motion is concerned, with the only major difference being they would likely have to entirely rework any sensor bar stuff. However, the nature of the Switch and now Switch Lite means that they can't just rely on the Joy-Con alone for this game. They would also need to account for a more traditional playstyle for the sword combat. Whether that means they just make sword slashes a simple button press, or they require use of the right stick or something for the angled slashes that are key to this game, is something they would have to account for with this remake. I think Skyward Sword is in a good place visually though, so that should at least make this somewhat more manageable if it ends up being something Nintendo is interested in doing. The idea has been floated by Aonuma on a few separate occasions, and Skyward Sword's 10th anniversary is next year, so just saying, it makes sense. One last HD remake in this vein that I honestly don't have much to say about other than it'd be neat to see, and I'm sure people would flock to it, is an Ocarina of Time remake. I'm sure quite a few people would love to see an HD remake of this game come to Switch, and that's honestly the whole reason why it's in this video, because I just think it would be neat. The next original game I think could potentially come out as early as this year is a follow-up to Hyrule Warriors. Koei Tecmo and Nintendo clearly love to work together, and there's like, what, 4 One Piece Warrior games? So adding another Zelda one makes sense here. But again though, like Twilight Princess, I'm not a huge fan of this one personally, or any Musou game to be honest, so I can't really speak to what I think this game can and should do better from the perspective of someone that liked the original. So I recruited Dan Seibert of That Cyber channel to take over this segment to do it justice.
Well, hello there. My name's Dan Seibert from That Cyber channel, and today I'm here to talk to you about Hyrule Warriors for Nintendo Switch, and more specifically, the sequel. Now, why you'd make a sequel to Hyrule Warriors is a little confusing if you look at the numbers. I mean, the definitive edition only sold about 500,000 units worldwide, and even less on the Wii U. But still, that doesn't mean there isn't content to pull from. There is a ton of Zelda lore that hasn't been explored in this celebration of everything Zelda. And I think that's the biggest point. Hyrule Warriors is a celebration of the franchise. It shows characters from all walks of Zelda. Every single one, from Wind Waker all the way to my favorite, Link's Awakening. I mean, my current favorite. I'm sure that's gonna change the next time I boot up another Zelda. The thing is, even though the definitive edition includes a lot of the characters, it doesn't include all of the characters, because the Zelda universe is large and vast. And when it comes to villains, sure, there was a good chunk of them in the game, but there was one specific one that was missing. Vaiti, the weird floating eyeball guy. Not using him in the original opens up a complete plot line for the next game, and possibly even deals with the Four Sword, which would make sense because then you would have multiple characters of the same type everywhere, so all of the links. So will we see Hyrule Warriors 2? I don't know, but I would be super excited to see one. And if you haven't played the original Hyrule Warriors, I highly recommend you pick it up. It's a perfect mindless hack and slash. Emphasis on mindless. Well, that's enough of me. Don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/thatcyberchannel. I'm gonna have a video this weekend. I promise.
To shift things back to remakes for a bit, I think Link's Awakening's success proves that there's a major hunger for Nintendo to reimagine classic 2D Zelda games. The obvious next step to that, in my opinion, is to go to Link to the Past. I honestly want them to go left field again with the art style. I want to see how well the original gameplay structure holds up. I want to see what things they feel need to be modernized. Even if that means just adopting a similar system to what Link's Awakening did with the additional mappable buttons for items. I would love to see how recreating this game in this way could potentially inform the future in return. And you'd have to imagine they'd make an amiibo for it like they did Link's Awakening, right? Maybe even release a Zelda one that coincides not only with this game's design but also her Smash Ultimate design. Kind of felt like a missed opportunity before. Just a thought. Honestly, more than all of that though, I just kind of want a bigger excuse to replay the Zelda game that made me fall in love with the franchise in the first place, and to be able to share that with a new wave of people that didn't get a chance to experience it yet for whatever reason. And a final point, I think 2 successes in this form would be all the more reason to invest in a full-fledged original 2D Zelda game on Switch. Honestly, I just want them to Breath of the Wild 2D Zelda by making the chemistry engine a franchise-wide staple feature, because I feel it makes everything from combat to puzzle design to just traversing the world more dynamic and as a result more interesting. Obviously, this will also mean entirely new dungeon designs, new enemy types, new bosses, a new story, and maybe even an entirely new Link. So that's an obvious advantage to going with an original concept rather than sticking to the remakes alone for 2D games. Even more than that though, I would like to see how the Switch itself could influence this as far as features go. Maybe they have something hardware specific similar to the Zelda puzzle that had players put their DS to sleep to solve it. They could use new Switch specific features in a similar way. Or less specific to Switch, they could just use the increased resolution and processing power for new kinds of enemies in regards to how intelligent they are and or what they're able to visually communicate. There's a ton of stuff like that that can be done here. And that's largely thanks to the fact that this would be the first original HD top-down Zelda game, but only time could tell just how revolutionary this new environment could be to that formula, and I'm sure the ideas floated somewhere within Nintendo. I just can't wait to see it come to fruition. And those are my thoughts for Zelda games I think could make their way to Nintendo Switch in 2020 and possibly even beyond that. What did you think? Did you have a favorite idea of any of the ones that we presented here? Or maybe you have an idea that we didn't mention? What's your favorite Zelda game so far? And thanks for watching. I'd appreciate it if you enjoyed this video to click the like button and share it with a friend that you think might also enjoy it. Also, don't forget to leave a comment with your thoughts on this video, maybe just how great Dan is. You should subscribe to him and us, ring the bell for new videos like this every Tuesday and Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern time. Okay, that's it for me. See you next week.